Got it? Okay. All right, that works. Alrighty. So again, assalamu alaikum to everybody. And thank you for coming out for, I guess, what is week 7. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قد أفلح من تزكى. Those will prosper who purify themselves. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله محمد وبارك وسلم. Allah in the Quran says, قد أفلح من تزكى. Last week, we started talking about different parts of the Nafs and why this was important when dealing with a lot of mental illnesses and a lot of cognitive behavioral issues. For the people who have not been here before, if you go back into some of the videos, you'll see where I explain in some detail the difference between mental illnesses and cognitive behavioral issues. Okay, we covered last week that there were different parts of the Nafs. We talked about why we as Muslims and as human beings in general struggle with different things throughout our lives, and how that avoidance of the struggle contributes to more problems for us. And I wanted to spend a little bit more time today talking about the Nafs, because it's very important that we get a firm understanding that when we hear the word Nafs, that we are also able to transcend the Arabic so that the people who are in the fields like psychotherapy, addiction, counseling, and things of that sort, so that everybody has a clear understanding of what the Nafs is. I think it's important to remind everybody that the word psychology really doesn't mean anything fancy, except for it's the study of the psyche, and the word psyche means soul. A lot of times we get bogged down in Eastern versus Western terminology, and we lose the real essence of the thing that we're talking about. Though there were a lot of psychotherapists and psychiatrists who did not acknowledge the presence of Allah, the presence of a higher power, there were some. And I think for a lot of people who come from a background where either they are a Muslim or have a very, very deep religious tradition, it's hard for them to understand psychology. It's hard for them to understand the field being disconnected from the source of all creation. So I wanted to mention that these things are really, really not different. And I also wanted to put a name out for you to go back and research. And there are many people. In terms of Islamic psychology, there are a lot of people who did a lot of work during the traditional ages of Islam. And up to modern times, there were a lot of non-Muslims and people of that sort who actually did acknowledge the presence of a higher power or the presence of Allah and tried to integrate the two things that had been polarizing, that being religion and science. One of the people who did a lot of work with this was a man by the name of Carl Jung. Last name spelled Jung. Okay, he was a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist years ago. I believe he passed in 1961, and he was one of the modern people in the field who definitely recognized the presence of a creator, something that was more powerful than ourselves, because he was having a lot of people come to him with a religious background, and a lot of the psychologists didn't really know how to understand those people's frames of references. Okay, Jung saw the human psyche as by nature religious. That's very, very, very important, because here it is, you have a man, in first in Europe and then the United States, who is willing to address the fact that there is a soul, and that soul has a creator, and it is fluid. Okay? With a lot of his explorations and a lot of his theories, a lot of his research, he definitely always included the source of God in those studies. Okay? So that really gives, some people something to look back on and say, well, wait a minute, not everybody was opposed to spirituality. Okay, it's very, very important. Now, in talking about the nafs, we hear this word a lot. When we are out there trying to do da'wah, when we're trying to talk to either non-Muslims about Islam, or when we're trying to help a Muslim that may be struggling with things, we hear people talk a lot about, the nafs, okay? And we can talk about it, we know what the word is, we can kind of sort of describe it, but we may not really, really know its entire makeup and then how to address the ills that that the nafs is experiencing. Okay, during, I guess, probably what is now 700-800 years or so ago or more, a lot of the scholars in Islam who were, Hufaz of Quran, and they were people who studied hadith, and they were people who studied anatomy and all kinds of things, they were jacks of all trades. They also looked at the study of the nafs, okay? And they developed something called al-Nafs, okay? Or the study of the nafs. When they considered the study of the nafs, they talked about the nafs being the psyche, or the soul, okay? In the times of what a lot of people call medieval Islam, they had a particular field that dealt with ilm al-nafs all by itself, okay? And they broke it into three categorizations. The first was ilaj al-nafs, which was the treatment of the soul, okay? Atib al-ruhani, which is the healing of the spirit, and atib al-qalb, which is the healing of the heart. Okay, so these were three different categorizations that the people worked on. So I chose today to talk about our spiritual GPS and how to navigate them. Because in truth, if we're going to talk about waking people up, waking ourselves up, coming from darkness to light, then we have to really have a good understanding about how the nafs can influence us. Okay? Before I begin talking about all of that, to give everybody a really good picture of what this looks like, if you can imagine a rope being stretched out. At one end of it, you have the nafs. In the middle of the rope, you have the qalb, the heart. And at the opposite end of the rope, you have the ruh, which is the spirit. Okay? The nafs primarily is responding a lot of times to shaitan. And the nafs influences the qalb, influences the heart. The ruh is pure, and this is the part where we like to be able to cultivate it and get in tune with Allah. This is the essence, the ruh. And unfortunately, a lot of times we're mired in so many things and sin and ghafla and all kinds of things, so that our nafs pulls on the heartstrings and it pulls us away from what we should really be doing. Okay? So, there are 7 tiers of the nafs. Okay? We talked about it last week, the first being the nafs al-amra, or the lower self, and that is the base instincts. Okay? It's very, very important that we understand the base instincts. We're talking about, sexual desires and lust. We're talking about material wealth, greed, and things of that sort. And it's very important that we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in the Quran. He gives us knowledge of it, but it's up to us to find it. When Yusuf alayhi salam was attacked by the women, we know the story, that he was able to refuse them. And we know that eventually those women, in particular the king's wife Zulaykha, was questioned about her involvement or her enticement of Yusuf alayhi salam. And in the Quran, when we read it, maybe we pass over it, but we actually have Zulaykha responding to the king, responding to Yusuf alayhi salam, and responding to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all at the same time. Okay? Her response when her husband asked her about her dealings was this: "And I do not acquit myself. Indeed, the soul is a persistent enjoiner of evil, except those upon which my Lord has mercy. Indeed, my Lord is forgiving and merciful." When we read it, a lot of times if we don't have the people around to explain the asbab to us, then we don't know who it is that's doing the talking. Well, this was Zulaykha. And Zulaykha was telling on herself. But the interesting part about Zulaykha was that Zulaykha was not a disbeliever. If you listen, she's saying, "Those upon which my Lord has mercy." My Lord. So she's telling you, she's acknowledging that she knows Allah. Okay? Indeed, my Lord is forgiving and merciful. She realizes that she made a mistake, and she is, in a sense, making the dua, saying, "My Lord is forgiving and merciful." Okay? But she also says, indeed, the soul is a persistent enjoiner of evil. She is telling us, telling Yusuf alayhi salam, telling the king, her husband, what the soul really, really is about. At its lowest level, it's about being an evil enjoiner. Okay? It's about enticing us and telling us to move towards those things that are bad and away from Allah. And I thought it was very, very interesting that here it is, you have Amra mentioned right there in the Quran, and unless we are able to read it and understand it, we pass over it. Because a lot of people, when they hear these different stages of the nafs, they say, well, where did this come from? And it is in the book of Allah. Okay? So we hear the word Amra mentioned in relation to, the sexual desires. Okay? Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu, said that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah forgives my followers. Allah forgives my followers those evil deeds their souls may whisper or suggest to them, as long as they do not act on them or speak, about them. Okay? The Quran urges man to forbid his lower nafs. Okay? The Quran says, وَمَا خَنْخَافَ مَرَكَمَهِ وَنَا النَّفْسَ وَسَتْ النَّفْسَ عَنَ الْحَوَّةِ. Okay? And as for him who fears to stand in the presence of his Lord and forbids the soul from low desires. Okay? So Allah is asking us, He's implying to us that we have to do some work in order to forbid ourselves these lower desires. It's not just going to happen magically. We actually have to do a lot of work with this. In one hadith, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the worst enemy you have is between your sides. And in this particular case, he was referring to the low desires. Okay? So now we understand that we know that the nafs is something that entices us towards, the lusts and things of that sort. But the nafs also entices us to, as I said before, greed, anger, defending our ego to the hilt, making excuses about things, being in denial about things. And these things are very, very big from a mental health standpoint and from the standpoint of dawah. When you're out there trying to deal with people and introduce them to Islam, it's very, very important that we understand that without a solid knowledge of how the ego works, without understanding that the ego, its ear is for shaitan, then a lot of times we may not be able to have a very, very good dialogue with the people that we're trying to help. A lot of times we see people do some things that just look strange. And we have to understand that it is nafsi. Okay? That it's an issue of the lower self that we see acting. The next level is the nafs al-lawama. Okay? In Surah Qiyamah, Allah mentions the nafs al-lawama. Okay? What does that mean? The nafs al-lawama is really about the self-accusing soul. Okay? And in it, you have where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing, saying, and I swear by the self-accusing soul. Okay? This is the soul that has been awakened. Their conscience. If you hear psychologists talk about conscience, this is somebody whose conscience now is raising up. Okay? They can go to the next level. All right? They know the difference between wrong and right. And at some point, they begin to ask for forgiveness and they begin to make amends. They begin to atone for the things that they do. Now, it doesn't mean that they do this every day. Okay? We have to keep that in mind, because I think sometimes, when I go other places and I give this talk, people will make the assumption, okay, hey, that person is active now. Their conscience is alive. They're awake. They're ready. But they struggle. We all struggle continuously with this. Okay? So that's the next level of it. The third level is nafs al-mutma'inah. Okay? All right? And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayatuha an-nafsu al-mutma'inah. O soul that is at peace, rest, satisfied, composed. Okay? So if you look into the lexicons of the Quran in the Arabic language, you will find that this mutma'inah doesn't just mean one word. Not just peace, not just rest, not just satisfied, and not just composed, but it means all of these. Okay? And this is, somebody asked one time, well, is this the soul of a person who is dead? No, this is the soul of a person who is alive. Okay? So this level is actually attainable, but there has to be a way to get to it. Okay? If you were to go out in the streets and mention this stuff to people right now, they would look at you like you're funny. So the objective is to be able to transcend the language, to translate the language into something that the people understand, something that is palatable, something that they can work with. Okay? And ultimately, it is by Allah, but we kind of look in the tool bag and see what we can pull out to help ourselves and help others with. Okay? At the stage of mutma'ina, we completely leave bad manners behind us now. Okay? We free ourselves from, worldly materialism. We're not worried about the fanciest phone. We're not worried about the big screen TV. We're not worried about the spinning rims, right? We're not worried about having the fanciest house on the block. Is it a greenhouse? How many square feet is it and all that kind of stuff. That's not what's important. Okay? We're not walking around with the flyest haircut going, look at me, look at me. Okay? In fact, we no longer even worry about our problems. Our problems have been submitted to Allah. And we understand that it is because of Allah that we need not worry about our problems, that He will fix whatever is there. And we said, Alhamdulillah. Okay? We spend our time now trying to get nearer to Him. Okay? So that is mutma'in. There are 4 other stages that I'll cover really, really quick. And that is Nafs al-Muhammad, which is acting in a good or right way. And the next stage is Nafs al-Radiyya, and that is very, very important. Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Radiyya Allahu anhum wa radu an. Okay? Allah is pleased with them and they with Him. Meaning that Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah entirely. Okay? So now, this is not the station of the complainer. This is not the person who is going to get on Facebook or Twitter and complain about something that happened in the news. This is a person who understands that every human being and their heart is between the 2 fingers, figuratively, of Allah. You see what I'm saying? So this person no longer worries about what is going to happen or what did happen. This person understands that it is the qadr of Allah and that we have to turn to Allah for whatever it is that we seek, and we turn to Allah with whatever we see happen. Okay? So that's Nafs al-Radiyya. Alright? The next level is Nafs al-Maradiyya. Okay? And this is the Nafs that has made peace. Okay? And Radiyya and Maradiyya are closely connected. This is, at this level, this is where we're able to let go. Okay? You've heard some of the Christian people say, let go and let God. Well, this is Maradiyya. Okay? This is Maradiyya. And it's very, very important that we understand that. And the last stage of the Nafs is as-Safiyya, in full agreement with the will of Allah. Okay? And again, once you get into the study of the Arabic language, you can go right into the Quran and you will find where Allah has mentioned these different stages of the Nafs. Okay? That's very, very important. Now, I talk about the Nafs in detail like that because I think primarily this is what a lot of us are going to run into when we deal with other people. This is a lot of what we struggle with our own selves. Okay? As you heard me say, I talked in previous videos about my own history with addiction, with sexual abuse, and different things of that sort. And it took a long time of working with both a therapist and the sheikh to be able to kind of work through a lot of that stuff. Okay. Eventually, what I figured out, and what I see even in a lot of my associates who I'm very close to, who have similar backgrounds, is that they eventually had to deal with the nafs, all of the issues of the nafs. Because even a person who has been sexually abused, they're going to have nafsi issues. They're going to wallow in victimhood and pity. And they're going to want to make everybody feel sorry for themselves, and they'll want to stay where they are. So on the one hand, they need the psychological help to be able to understand that this wasn't supposed to happen to them. At the same time, they need the spiritual understanding that, you know what, I can't make everybody responsible for what happened to me. I have to improve my life, okay? And I talk about that a lot. Now, I want to cover these things called tasfiyah and tazkiyah, because there's a huge misconception among Muslims about the two. Unfortunately, we tend to hear one or two maybe groups of Muslims talk about tasfiyah and tazkiyah, and I don't have to mention the name of the people. It is important to go back to the Book of Allah, where we can find how these words were used, so that we understand that this isn't something that one or two particular groups of people made up. And you don't have to be in a particular group to do tasfiyah or tazkiyah. We're all required to cleanse our soul, to purify ourselves, okay? The root word of tasfiyah is safa, and it means to clean, okay? It means to clean. Tazkiyah comes from the Arabic verb meaning to purify, but it is also closely related to a word that we know, and that word is zakat. Okay? And zakat is normally thought of as being charity. Okay? But the zakat is a kind of charity that helps purify our deeds. If you look into the books of fiqh on zakat, they will talk about the zakat being used to purify your deeds. You can go back and look at that. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but it is there for you to see it. Okay? So this tazkiyah is coming from this word zakat, okay? And it means to purify. If you think about a mirror has a lot of dust on it. A lot of times all you need for it is a cloth. You know, you wipe it clean with the cloth. Maybe you get a little Windex or something like that, and it's done. You know, you don't have to do a whole lot of scrubbing for the mirror. Okay? That's an example of tasfiyah. Okay? Where you're just cleaning something. Okay? Tazkiyah is a little different. Okay? Tazkiyah is a little different. Let's say, for instance, you've been outside washing your car because, you know, you're polishing the item, right? Like a lot of people do, that material thing, right? And your towels get really, really, really dirty. Okay? And maybe you used the towel that your wife didn't want you to use, and you're going to have to clean that towel. Now, it's not going to be sufficient for you to just rub that towel, or even to just soak that towel. You're probably going to have to wash that towel a few times in order to get all the grime and grease and the gook out of it, you see. Well, now that is an example of tazkiyah. Okay? That is an example of tazkiyah. And it is that tazkiyah and tasfiyah that we have to be able to apply. Okay? Now, last week I mentioned something about the word falat. So I don't want to go back on it, but it's important that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts off in al-Mu'minun with the words قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Okay? The believers will be successful. The word falah means that. And that success is a success that after you get it, there is no failure. Okay? This is the end, and it is a successful end. Okay? If you go back to last week, you can hear a little bit about what I said about the word falah and how important it is. Okay? But also in Surah Al-Mu'minun, when he's talking about the believers being successful, he also talks about zakah. Okay? And how engaging in the zakah attaches to our success. What is one of the words that is closely associated with zakah? What do we do to purify ourselves? We do a tazkiyah. Okay? Remember that the zakah is something that purifies our deeds. Okay? Tasfiyah, when the heart is dirty, the heart gets dirty like the mirror, and it needs a wiping. So tasfiyah is sufficient for the heart. Whereas the nafs, because that is where most of us spend our time being mired in it, it needs tazkiyah. It needs a lot more work. If we're able to work on our nafs, if we're able to activate our conscience, then we can start to look towards the heart. Okay? We have heard the hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that a believer commits a sin so that he gets a black dot on his heart. And then he commits another sin so that he gets another black dot on his heart. And he commits another sin so that he gets another black dot on his heart. And what eventually happens? The whole heart is black. Okay? In order for that to happen, the person's nafs has to be mired in sin. And the thing about the nafs, when it's at the lower level, when we're operating from the lower level, then that nafs entices us to do wrong, and it makes wrong fair seeming to us. It rationalizes the behavior. So as I said before in previous lectures, if we rob a building, if we rob a bank and we get away with it, what are we going to do? Do it again. We're going to do it again. Okay? And what are we going to do after that? We're going to do it again. If we fornicated with somebody, we got away with it, there was no nothing, there was no crime, nobody spoke out against it, what are we going to do? And somebody lets us do it again, what are we going to do? We're going to do it again, and we do it again, and we do it again. And guess what's happening to the heart? All those black dots accumulate. Okay? So, it is true that a lot of issues that we see going on in our society are due to the hearts of people. But in order to touch the hearts of people and to touch our own hearts, to be able to assess them, we have to take a really, really good look at our nafs. Okay? And the tazkiyah gives us, an opportunity to do that. Okay? And there are numerous ways to deal with that. There are a lot of scholars who talked about that. There are people in the community, I hope, that are able to help deal with that. I like to talk about lowering the gaze when it comes to women. Just so happens that today I have more brothers in the room than sisters in the room, and it's something that I don't get to talk to brothers a lot, about. I gotta be honest. Look, brothers ain't gonna admit it, but some do. If you say lower the gaze, some brothers are gonna tell you, man, that ain't really working the way it should be working. Have you ever heard that before? You ever heard somebody say that before? Like, yo, I've lowered the gaze, but it ain't, look, they're dressed like that, and I got these urges, and it's not really working. And then maybe somebody comes along and they says, well, fast, right? They tell you fast. Okay, well, I fast. I'm trying to lower my gaze. Yeah, it's kind of, I'm still struggling with it. Okay? Well, the first thing to know is that Allah ordained the struggle for us. Okay? So it's nothing to be embarrassed about. But it's very important that we come out of the denial about it instead of just being pretentious and pretending that, I'm lowering my gaze and I'm cool. Because the reality is, we can be in a dark room by ourselves as men and think a thought and be ready to do something, and guess what? There was nobody around that enticed us. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to look at all the different ways and means to deal with our nafs, okay, when it comes to those urges. We have lowering the gaze, okay? We have fasting. And when we say fasting, it doesn't just mean abstaining from food. You have to seriously fast. That means that if you have a problem looking at women and, lowering your gaze is not helping, or it's kind of helping, but you need something more intense, that means fasting. That means that, guess what? The internet goes away. Facebook goes away. The TV goes away. Those little ads that come in the mail to your house that's got the JCPenney, section in it, that stuff goes away. And these things, a lot of us, we don't really think about. You understand what I'm saying? But we've got this stuff called testosterone in us that Shaitan will take a hold of and misuse it. Okay? So we really have to understand that when we are fasting, it's not just abstaining from the food per se. We have to look at, okay, why am I fasting? Okay, I am trying to purify myself. I am trying to purify my nafs. Okay, that means that now when we're at work and that nice looking sister is flirting with us, hey Jack, go in the back, make salat, I'll go make wudu, go get your prayer book, pull something out. You have to really be rehearsing the ayat of Allah, okay, to help deal with yourself, okay? Because if you don't do it, it'll be just like a drug. And for a lot of us men, testosterone and women, they're like drugs. You see what I'm saying? So this is why it's very important that men understand we need to deal with our nafs, okay? So what the Quran says we can have 4 wives. You know what? I get it. And I'm not opposed to it, but what I'm saying is, as long as you got nafsi issues like that, you probably need to be very careful, okay? Because what will happen is, you'll go out and get you 4, and then you'll drop 1 and get you 1 more, and it'll be a revolving door, okay? This is how the nafs will influence you if you don't purify yourself and ask Allah to help purify you, okay? So that's very important. Now you heard me talk about the heart, the qalb, okay? And it's really simple. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fi qulubihim maradun, okay? Marid means sick, okay? So if I say ana marid, that means I am sick, okay? In their hearts is a disease, all right? And there are numerous diseases. Okay? So Allah is telling us that the qalb, it has a disease. Okay? And we have to spend some time assessing ourselves to figure out what is it? Where is it coming from? How to deal with it? Who can help me deal with it? Okay? The qalb, just like the nafs, has to be trained. Okay? It has to work on abstaining from evil. All right? So, no backbiting. All right? No backbiting. Seriously, leave it alone. Because if you're backbiting, you're eating the flesh of your brother, and I can tell you that you're eating the heart of your brother. And the next time when that brother sees you and he finds out that you were talking about him, what is going to be activated in him? What did I spend the earlier part of the conversation talking about? What part? His nafs. His nafs. Because that's his ego. And you just trampled on his ego. But you also hurt his heart. So next time when he has something really, really serious going on, is he going to trust you? No. So now you just did away with the amana. Okay? The trust that you have between two brothers, the amana, you just did away with that. So you ate his flesh, you ruined his heart, he's defending his ego and he's angry, and you just ruined the amana between the two of you. You see how quickly that decays? Okay? So, abstaining from evil. Taqwa. Avoiding what looks evil. Okay? We know in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us. You know, he lets us know that part of the book is allegorical and part of it is just exact. And follow that part that it is exact, that we can of our own understanding. Okay? Because, you know, if you don't know that other stuff and you started doing your own little fatwa about it and everything, maybe you'll mislead yourself. If you know that it is potentially misleading, don't go there. In addictions counseling, I tell people all the time, hey, look, if you know that that block is hot, don't go on that block. Okay? We tell people all the time, you have to change people, places, and things. Meaning, the people who you used to hang around, you can't hang around them no more. Why? Because they're going to lead you towards using again, towards that evil. The places that you used to go to, can't go there anymore because it's going to trigger you. You know where you can find the next hit. There you go. We're falling right back into that same cycle. Okay? The things. Let go of the things. Whether it's the music that used to entice you, the certain clothes that used to entice you, whatever it is that used to entice you towards that addictive behavior, you got to get rid of it. Okay? And that's why a lot of times we're asking Allah for taqwa. When we're asking Allah for taqwa, what we're asking Him for is give us the strength to stay away from that stuff that we don't need to be near. Okay? Wara. We attempt to get away from things that are not related to Allah. We know that there's a hadith that says, right, leave what doesn't concern you. Okay? And that's very, very difficult to do in this day and age. I mean, think about it. You get up, maybe you make salah. Notice I said maybe, because a lot of times we don't put first things first. We get on Facebook, we see somebody make a comment about something. Now we got something to say about something, and before you know it, it's like, we lost 20, 30 minutes, we're late to work, and we're involved in something that we probably shouldn't even have been involved in. Okay? When it comes to cats on the block, how many people have gotten shot because, you know what? And probably didn't really have anything to do with me, and now look, now I got to take the rap for something. You see? So it is very, very real. Okay? We have to be content with whatever Allah gives us, okay, in order to help our qalb. We have to be content. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do in this day and age because the TV and all the ads tell you don't be content. You're sitting there watching a flat screen TV and they're showing you an ad about another flat screen TV. So now you want to run out and go get the next big flat screen TV, right? A few years ago, they came out with a Wii. I was in the store the other day. Forget the Wii. Now they got Wii U. You see what I'm saying? And it's just non-stop. At what point do you jump off of that little rat wheel and say enough is enough? If you're not able to tell your qalb that, then that is going to keep you away from nearness to Allah. Okay? The shukr. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go with sabr first. The patience with whatever Allah does. And I have a good friend right now who's traveling around the country and he's talking to a lot of people about understanding why bad things happen. As you know, last year was a very, very traumatic year for a lot of people. We had the zombies down in Florida, and we had the shootings in the cinemas and the schools and all that kind of stuff. And everybody, when that stuff happens, everybody's always trying to figure out why it happens, you know. And even though we kind of sort of understand it, you know, our hearts still waver in that understanding. And this is why we have to rely on Allah. Okay, heavily. We have to have patience with whatever Allah does. And I can think of no better story in the Quran than the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr. Okay, when he asked him, you know, can I come with you? You know, can I hang out with you? And Khidr is like, man, you can't have patience with me. And we know the story and how that goes. You see what I'm saying? And at the end, what does Khidr say to Musa? He says, see, I told you you couldn't have patience with me. You see what I'm saying? So that was Allah working on Musa alayhi salam, getting him to where he needed to be in his development. Shukr is another way to fix the qalb. And shukr is just being grateful for whatever Allah gives, okay, and for whatever Allah keeps away. For whatever Allah gives and for whatever Allah keeps away. And I always tell people, whenever they come to the talks that I give, don't be surprised by the low numbers of people that show up. We don't expect a lot of people. These talks can be intrusive. Sometimes I share things, sometimes other people share things that can be disturbing, if you will. We thank Allah that He allowed us to come here because maybe we could not have come here. And we don't worry about those who are not able to come. We make dua for ourselves and for them, and we move on from it. That is a way to protect the heart. Because otherwise, what we'll start doing is complaining about why people are not here. Oh, this was a good talk, and man, people should be here. Or this is a bad talk, and maybe I shouldn't have been here. Well, Allah put you here. And Allah kept whoever He wished to keep away from here. You see? So, we also seek happiness of Allah. Okay? You heard me say that Allah is pleased with them and He is pleased with them. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. We try to we try to get to the point where we are continuously happy with Allah. Okay? Because that is the true happiness. That is the success. Okay? We also try to remind ourselves through our own reflection and reading the Quran of the fear of Allah. Okay? We also have to have hope in Allah. And that's a very difficult thing sometimes, especially in the places where we live. A lot of times we see things that go on in the streets. You know, just maybe last year or the year before, there was a guy that got shot right out here on the street, right out here in front of this place. You see what I'm saying? And, you know, if you let your mind play tricks on you, then you'll be asking questions like, how could that happen right in front of a masjid? And how could that? Well, you know what? This is Allah. You see what I'm saying? Allah brought this about for a reason. Okay? And we have to have the hope in Allah that Allah is going to make those hearts that are stone get soft. Because we have to remember that we may have been at a place where at one point our heart was also stone. Or we may still be at a place where maybe our heart needs to be softer than what it is. You see? So everybody is in that condition. We have to have yaqeen, a complete faith in Allah. But that yaqeen is a kind of clear sight, a kind of basira. And we know the hadith, Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you know, that eventually this mu'min, I become his hearing, his sight, and things of that nature. And that is the yaqeen that is referred to. That is the basira. Okay? We always have to be checking our heart for the intention of things. We have to get rid of malice in our hearts. We have to get rid of the resentment and the anger that is in our hearts. Okay? And this is why Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told that brother, he said, don't get angry. And he asked him again, and he said, don't get angry. And he asked him, what can I do again? And he said, don't get angry. We have to do away with the malice, because it does two things. It ruins our relationships with our brothers, with our sisters, with our families, our daughters, and everybody. And it also takes us away from the nearness to Allah. I don't know if you've ever been really angry before and tried to make salah. Think about how difficult that is. A lot of times when we're angry, we just flat out miss it. We just flat out miss it. Okay? We have to get rid of that. Okay? We also have to be very truthful about our condition with Allah. And that is sidr. We have to be very truthful with Allah. There's no fooling Allah. Okay? And we have to be willing, very willing to get to know ourselves so that we're able to have a very intimate conversation with Allah. Okay? And I'll be talking about somebody later one of the Anbiya who had a very, very intimate conversation with Allah. And because of that intimate conversation with Allah, Allah changed his whole life in one small conversation, a complete 180. I'll talk about that later on, inshallah, not this week. And we have to be extremely humble before Allah. We know that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, we should pray as though Allah is in front of us, that we see Allah, and if we cannot envision that, then we should pray with the understanding that Allah sees us, okay? And that is the humility. But it's not just about praying as if Allah sees us. We have to always have an understanding that Allah sees us. You see what I'm saying? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to, when he would go to the bathroom, he would put a stick out in front of him and he would cover up his head when he used the bathroom. And he was asked why he did this. And he said that he was ashamed before Allah. This humbleness, you see? Think about that. So we have to be understanding that even when we are doing something, as base as using the bathroom, right? We have to always understand that Allah is there. You see, his presence is there, and he is witnessing us at all times. And I think a lot of times we fall into forgetting that, okay? We forget that when we're in traffic and we're trying to get home real quick because we got something to do and we're upset about it. Allah sees how we're dealing with that. Are we being patient in that? Our boss had to get on us about calling off or something like that, Allah sees how we are dealing with that. Okay? All of these things. Okay? The dhikr of Allah. Always, always remembering Allah. Okay? This is for the qalb. And a lot of times we have so much stuff going on that we don't really, really focus on remembering Allah. And we have to do that in everything. Okay? There was one scholar of old who would recite all of the Quran every day. And it was crazy that he would go and recite the whole Quran every day. He would go and conduct his business, and he would stop and conduct his business at the market, and as soon as he finished, he would start back reciting the Quran. You see, just like that. And he would do that all day. Okay? That is one of the greatest examples of the dhikr. Okay? So those are some of the things that help deal with the qalb, that help soften up the qalb. But before we can soften up the qalb, we have to really, really take stock of the nafs and be working on how to deal with the nafs. Now, I will say this, that it is very, very possible to be working on. In fact, it's thought to be a good thing to be working on the nafs and the qalb at the same time. Okay, that's really the requirement. We shouldn't necessarily stay on one level and work on one thing and neglect the other things. It's a tandem team effort. But these things are very, very important. Okay, I wanted to talk about those things because later on in the coming weeks there will be some stories that I'll mention from the Quran where people were dealing directly with their nafs, directly with their qalb, and we can really, really get a good idea of how they were able to make the changes. Because a lot of times when we read the Quran, we read the story and we miss some of the fine principles in it that if we just stop for a minute and reflect on them, they have huge implications for how we live our lives. Okay? So I'll stop there. I'm going to stop the recording to talk to you all about something a little bit different. And if you have questions, then I'll take those questions if there are any.